speaking of ice falling on things and specifically personal safety, which we'll probably get to in a little bit, I have a rule that I think everybody should follow, or if you're new to cold weather country, pay attention to this. Always wear a hard hat around your towers when they have any ice on them, especially if you have FM days or any sort of antennas on the tower, or even an AM tower, because the ice will fall off and eventually clock you or whoever else is on the ground.
We are happy to have with us, Mike, it's SB 60 and 54.
Yes, sir.
Richmond and Tidewater. They're with us this afternoon, and we are grateful for their attendance and participation. And welcome, guys. And we hope you enjoy the program. But today, it's going to be a neat one. I'm really looking forward to hearing and seeing these guys. We've got Mike Catfish Dosch and Corny Gould, and they're going to talk about the audio. Yeah, the Chameleon. Guys, take it away.
Barry, thanks for inviting us today.
Hello.
Hello. Corny. Hey. Corny, your microphone could be a little louder.
Let me say a few things.
There you go.
Louder. There you go.
There you go. You hear me okay, guys? Everything all right?
We do.
Okay, cool. So I think the last time I addressed your group, we were talking about Studio Hub. This was after we had purchased the company radio systems. And but today we're going to talk about some Angry Audio products. This is the company that I started prior to getting sucked into the great maw of the last couple of years, which was digesting Studio Hub. So now we're actually back to developing Angry Audio products again. And I'm going to take you back a little bit. I'm going to take you back 6 months. I think it's been 6 months, maybe 9 months now. And then I'm going to take you back a decade or two, and then Corny's going to bring you back up to current. So about 9 months ago, I approached Corny with an idea. And by the way, Corny, for those of you who don't know him, I think everybody knows him, but if anybody here doesn't know him, he was the processing architect for Omnia behind the Omnia 11, and now he's working with us. About 9 months ago, I went to him and I said, I got this idea to fix a problem that's kind of a long-standing issue inside of radio studios. And the problem is that talent can't listen off the air anymore. They used to be able to back in analog days, but then we introduced so much latency with digital and all the accoutrements that go with digital that they were just no longer able to listen to their own glorious voices in processed sound. And a lot of them complained about it. Now, a lot of you guys stepped in and fixed the problem for them by deploying analog processors. Maybe it took something out of a closet and dusted it off and put it in the studio for them. When I was with Axia, I had this notion to fix it in the console. So I built in a simple Omnia 3-band processor right into the Axia mix engine so that you could get kind of a low latency processing loop there. But I don't know if it's ever really been like targeted as a thing that needs to be solved with a product. And so I approached Corny and said, I don't know anything about audio processing other than, I know when it sounds good. Could you help with this? And he said, yeah, sure, that'd be great. So we started working together on this small processor that was going to be a headphone amp and processor combined. So you'd be able to, listen to your music in the studio and kind of simulate on the air, right? That was kind of the original idea. But when I sent the tools up to Corny to work with, he had never worked with the tools that we use. We use analog devices, DSPs. And at Telos, they did something else. So he wasn't that familiar with the tools. So he had to learn them. And he said, well, shoot, as long as I'm learning to use these tools, I might as well build something. So he decided that he was going to model in DSP something that he had built in analog years before. And so now I'm going to take you back a couple decades, because Corny had this idea decades ago, basically, that that maybe audio processors should use the content itself to adjust their parameters. And so he had this idea, thought it might be kind of cool sounding, and built an implementation of this in analog, which is remarkable. I've seen pictures of this thing. I've never seen it in real life, but it looks like a bathtub full of electronics. And you know, so somehow using CMOS logic and gates and, you know, all kinds of stuff, he was able to kind of build an analog computer, and then use the results of that analog computer to drive VCAs and make a multi-band processor that had some adaptive concept where it would change its parameters, its attack and release times, its crossover points. It would change some things as a result of what kind of content was coming through it. And so he called the result Chameleon, because Chameleon is very transparent. It's there, but you can't really hear it. That's the concept behind it. And so he decided that he was going to model this in DSP. And so, you know, after a few weeks, he sends me a link and says, listen to this. And I listened to it, and I was just completely blown away. And it turned out that he was able to successfully model Chameleon in DSP. But then, of course, once we're in DSP, there's all kinds of things that he was able to do that he couldn't do in analog. At least he didn't require a soldering iron and a screwdriver to do it. And so this is kind of the story behind Chameleon, where it came from. He's been dreaming about this processor for years. In fact, he told me recently, I just learned this, that he took a few of these ideas, this concept of having the processor parameters adjust dynamically according to what the content is doing. He used a few of these tricks and techniques within the Omni 11. And so there's a lot of fans of Omni 11 out there that, particularly in G-Force, that are very impressed with how natural sounding it is. And but that was just a couple of ideas. Now Chameleon is fully formed within DSP under Angry Audio, and he's gonna actually talk you through the processor. But there's a couple things I want to point out before I give it over to Corny. One is that the original idea, let's make a headphone amp with a processor built in, morphed into let's build products, you know, more than that. So what we're going to talk about today is two products that we're introducing, and we're not done yet. We're probably going to have some more things down the road that we're not going to talk about today. But the two products we're going to talk about today are the C3, which is the headphone audio processor with a built-in headphone amp, and the C4, which is a live stream audio processor. And so this is optimized for streaming audio applications. Makes a great HD processor, you know, where you don't necessarily want to go spend a fortune on those alternate streams. But oh, I guess I gave it away a little bit, didn't I? I mentioned that it doesn't cost a fortune. So these boxes are remarkably inexpensive, and they sound amazing. The other thing I wanted to point out is that since Chameleon, since the technology itself is making decisions, processing decisions based on the content, it's kind of unlike anything you've seen before. So rather than having 100 knobs and dials on the front of it, it's pretty straightforward. You flip a few switches, and then the processor just gets to work. And we've had some processing experts that have like listened to it and said, this sounds great. And then they've looked at it and said, how could it possibly sound great? You know, when it's not being tuned by an expert. And the answer to that is the tuning is happening automatically and dynamically. And so you can use the same box for any format, and it will adjust to the content. You have a little bit of user input, and Corny will walk you through that. But it's, you know, 10 minutes of user input as opposed to days and days of, let me go listen to it in the car and come back and tweak, and let me go listen to it on the home system, and let me come back and tweak. All of this is kind of done. And we think that's a good solution for people who don't want to spend a lot of time tuning their processors, or even people who don't know how to tune processors. They might find some satisfaction with being able to use an audio processor that doesn't require, going and picking up an expert at the airport to come in and tune it for them. It's not over the air processing. And we're not getting into that, just because I know that question will come up, like, well, is there going to be an FM version of this? There will not. This is going to be streaming audio and studio audio only. And I think that's about all I needed to say to you before Corny takes over and gives you some of the backstory and some of the tech.
All righty.
Yeah.
What a lead in. Thanks, Catfish. So I do have some things to show you in a presentation. So just a heads up to Barry, we get ready for screen share in a little bit. And I'm gonna start off by talking about the C4 audio processor, and I might as well just get the screen thing going here. Like, really before I hit screen share. And so we're gonna get that going. All right, so can everybody see the
Yep.
angry audio? Okay, cool. So we're going to talk about the C4 live stream audio processor, and this is what it looks like. As Mike says, it's pretty straightforward on the front panel. So you've got headphone jacks to hear what it's doing, both a 1/4 inch and mini. I've got a few LEDs to tell you what's going on, and a rotary switch that has 4 positions on it. And then on the left-hand side there, to the right of the LED, is a little trim pot, which is the output level control. So we'll start going from the output level control. We're going to move one step right into the rotary selector switch, and it has 4 positions on it. The bottom position is one where it's essentially bypassed out. So you put it in that, it's just a straight headphone amp, or whatever is feeding in is what you hear on the output. If you go 1 click clockwise to the 9 o'clock position, that will give you a setting where it tells the Chameleon to be open sounding. So not as dense, open, or more natural sounding, if you will. So that's for people who want to preserve some dynamics and sound good. The 12 o'clock position is what I would consider sort of like a medium setting, which is kind of not as open, but not quite as dense as it could get. And then when you click it to the 3 o'clock position, that is the dense setting or highly aggressive processing setting. Now, because of the smarts in the Audio Chameleon, the highly aggressive setting, I'll use in quotation marks, because it's really not like radio style in your face. You'll hear it, but it's pretty tame in what it does, but it tracks pretty tightly on the audio. So it's pretty cool, pretty unique sound. And on the 3 LEDs on the screen, the amber one is basically your gate threshold. So when the audio falls below the gate, that LED will illuminate and tell you that the gain stages are frozen on the processor. Whenever the green LED is on, it is telling you that the processor is actively processing audio. And then the red LED is when you're overdriving the input on the box. You don't want to do that. So any questions? Any questions on the front panel so far? Okay. So what the C4 live stream audio processor gives you is it has the loudness control for streaming audio, in this case just general audio processing level writing and all that. You could also use it for your HD subchannel, so HD 2, 3, 4. You don't want to use it on HD 1 because you've got to have something matched up to your main or on the air processor handling the analog. But for the subchannels, you can certainly use it for that. Use it for streaming audio or live streams. Use it as an audio processor for visual radio, where a lot of radio stations are getting into that now, where they're putting on TV programs essentially that are happening in parallel to what people are hearing on the radio. And a number of folks have approached us saying, hey, can we use this for that? Because this sounds perfect for that. And yes, you can. The latency is low enough for that. With the live stream C4, the latency is about 5 milliseconds because of the look ahead limiter, but it's certainly short enough where we can use it with video stuff or use it in parallel with video. As Mike pointed out, we have we call it an AI, an expert system, where it's tuning itself to the content coming into the processor. And that's something that's sort of been, any of you who have known me for a long time, you know that I'm always looking for ways to make processing smarter and make it work with content. And the Chameleon is the first time I've managed to have everything I wanted to do happening the way that I wanted it to happen, which makes the simple user setup possible, actually. So because of that, this box is really kind of a set it and forget it kind of thing. And I know from my time in radio and some of the stations I work at now as a contractor, most of our time is going to be spent on the main channel that most of your listeners are listening to. And when it comes to the streams and the other HD channels, you know, it's kind of like, yeah, I would like to spend more time on that, but I've got other things to worry about. So one of the wishes I had was something where you can just kind of set it up really quick, get it to sound good, and not have to think about it for a while because you've got other things to do. So in those kind of applications, the Chameleon boxes work great for that stuff. This is the front panel of the C4 Limestream processor. Zoomed in, it's a rendering of the hardware. So it gives you a good view of what I was describing here. And this is the rear panel. So this is all of your I/O on the Audio Chameleon. So we've got both digital and analog I/O, and we've got XLRs in and out for analog, and we're using the Studio Hub form factor RG45 type connectors for digital in and out as well as analog. So if you've got Studio Hub in your setup, you can just go right in and out of this with your standard shielded Cat 6 or whatever, or Cat 5, and be in good shape. You've got two dip switches on the back here. The first one, when it's in the up position, engages the loudness limiter, which will cause the output of the Chameleon C4 to conform to the ITU BS1770 -14 LUFS output reference level. And if you need to go lower than that, what you can do while using an external loudness meter, you can actually decrease the output level of the box to take it down however farther you want to take it, whether it's -16 or -15 LUFS. But right now, a lot of services are kind of at -14, such as YouTube and Spotify, Apple, and some other things. So out of the box with this, I decided just to set it up for the -14, because if I set up for -16, then you're stuck at -16. So you can make anything lower than that happen with the output level control. So that was a trade-off I made on that. So let's take a look at what's going on in here, what makes this AI stuff is all about. So the way the C4 and the C3 topology works, and this is specifically C4, and I'll tell you what the difference between the two are. Your program comes in and it hits a crossover right away. And from there, it's split into 4 bands, and you have 4 bands of what I call smart processors. And these processors do a lot per band. So they are handling compression and like a fast limiting type function that you would normally see in a processor with a chain of stages. It's doing it all in one stage, and it's using intelligence to do that. And then the resulting output is summed together. So you've got combined AGC/limiter type function going on in each of the 4 bands. And then those 4 bands, they are doing their own analysis of what's happening in their domains, and they're making decisions as to the time constant, shaping, and all that. And I'm able to do some really cool stuff where you're able to actually look at the waveform in real time and make a few quick decisions as to where it should be in the ballpark, and then set itself up, and then it can fine tune itself over time from there. And your user input is also giving some influences over how it does that, how fast it's going to do it, how aggressive it's going to be when it makes those changes. So that's where your influence comes in. The smart processors can talk to each other. And one of the cool things that I had fun watching when I got it working, and this is one of those things that's kind of spooky but cool at the same time, is I will monitor what they're deciding to do and what they're sharing with each other. And you'll get these moments where usually 2 of the 4 bands will start colluding with each other in some way where they coordinate, and then the third one might come in or might not. And normally when you have that happen, then the band that's not involved in that discussion, if you will, kind of floats off on its own, and that's when the main system controller goes, hold your horses, son. You got a couple of these guys doing something here, so you gotta hold back here a little bit, let them do their thing. So I've been watching that, and it's been fun. And it's one of those things where, you know, the intention is there for that to happen, but it's kind of cool to actually just watch it do its thing and see if it's making all the right decisions or not. And it's really cool when you see it do that. So that's one of those really cool things. So anyway, as those bands are working, it all sums together back into a main, you know, signal again. And from there, it hits the look ahead limiter and the ITU BS1770 based loudness control. And that's one section I've been working a lot on for a while. And actually, a lot of time was spent in that section of the processor there. And I designed that with the trends that I've been seeing with streaming audio happening, and file-based stuff too. And so I figured this is a good thing to have in here. It's not like the loudness meters that you would usually see, in that there's functions in there that are like a loudness meter, but there are other things that the system controller steps in and manages the loudness control as well based on the content. So it gives it the ability to be smart with the way it's handling your loudness situation. Now, one of the things you can do with this let me back up a little bit. You've got essentially 3 processing positions that are on the front panel that you can choose from. But really, depending on how you want to use the box, you've got 6. And here's what I mean by that. Here I've got, these are some, this is Roxy Music Avalon I recorded, and it's done 2 different ways to get -14 LUFS with the Chameleon. The first one is just switching on the loudness limiter and letting it do its thing at -14, which is the left-hand picture. So that gives you a nice open sound, some nice transients. But there is a difference in the sound when you switch off the loudness controller. And switching off the loudness controller really means that it's just setting itself to a higher loudness level. So when you switch it off, the Chameleon sits at about -10 LUFS. And so with that in mind, there's a definite change in the texture, because as you can see when you look at picture number on the right, it's more processed. So what you can do there is to lower the output level of the Chameleon, which is what I did here, so that the resulting output is then at -14 LUFS. And because the loudness controller is still engaged, it's still going to hold it there at -14. It's just more processed. So you've got a light version and a heavier version of those 3 presets based on how you want to use the Chameleon and its outputs. So that gives you a little more flexibility there. So next we have our C3 headphone processor. And the C3 headphone processor is, I'm going to go back here, is using the same topology as the C4, except we do not have the look ahead limiter and ITU BTS 1770 loudness control. The loudness controller is there because it's integrated into the Chameleon section, but it's not really tied to anything that's a tight look ahead limiter. So it doesn't really lend itself to streaming very well. But by removing that, we can get the latency down below 3 milliseconds on it. So with that in mind, it makes a great headphone monitor processor. And I've been testing this out with a couple of people locally that I know, and I just kind of barge in on them on their shows and put the thing in their headphone chain and plug their headphones in and say talk. And they start using it, and then they're instantly thrown back to, you know, the days of when you can listen to yourself off the air, because it's 4 bands and everything. It does a pretty good job of emulating all over the air. And even when I was using it, it's spooky. It's like, okay, I haven't heard this since the good old days. And the only thing that's missing in this case is that you don't have the left minus right transmission noise that you would normally hear in your headphones while you're talking behind you, the shh, you know, in the background. So, you know, it's the only thing that's missing to make it sound like you're listening to yourself on the air, but it's pretty effective.
Sorry to interrupt you, Corny, but just so these guys know, Corny actually did suggest that we put some hiss in there. And that idea didn't make it to the product, but yeah, let's make this noisy so it sounds like FM, right?
Yeah, put some left minus right noise in there, and it'll maybe a little bit of fuzz distortion on there too, you know, to simulate that. But that's all you really need. Then you will swear you're listening to it off the air. But like I said, the latency is under 3 milliseconds, and that's because we took out the look ahead limiter and the complicated stuff that takes time to compute. There's a polarity inversion switch on it. Now the latency is low, but you may, depending on how your facility is designed, you may have some latency built into your system already. So 3 milliseconds might make it a little noticeable for some people. And over the years, one of the tricks I did, and a lot of you probably have done too, when you have jocks who complain a lot about latency, especially when it's a little bit of latency in there, sometimes just flipping the polarity on their headphones will help them deal with it, because their voice is suddenly more in phase with the waveforms going through their head, and allows them to deal with it until they adapt to the actual latency. And then after they adapt to it, you can flip it either way and they don't hear a difference anymore. But it's just a training thing. So that's a little trick in the toolbox here. And that switch is in there instead of it's in the same position that the C4 uses for turning on and off the loudness controller. But since we don't really have an adjustable loudness controller on here, we have room to put a switch on it, so we can use the same hardware for both products. This has a really cool, clean headphone amplifier, which is one of the things that Catfish has in his bag of tricks at Angry Audio from all the headphone amps that we sell. And so this product inherits those great headphone amplifiers as well, to drive all kinds of headphones, whether it's high impedance, low impedance, it doesn't care. And now with the features of the RJ45 jacks on there, you can feed multiple headphone amps with this one box. So you can have this in maybe the main host position, and then it can dump its audio out to other Angry Audio headphone amps or Studio Hub headphone amps, and then you can have one box feed everybody in the room, or you can have the box somewhere else and in the main shop and feed headphones with it, and use it to also feed house monitors or maybe some IFBs and stuff like that. I've always had a dream of a product like this to use in the days of remotes, where you're doing the mix minus feed back out to the field. And it always drove me nuts, because you can tell how bad the board ops are jocking the boards, because you're having to be a human compressor out at the remote site writing the mix minus return. So I always dreamed of having some kind of a box back at the studio that could sound like you're on the air to feed the mix minus back at the remote site. So you can certainly use them for this. So that's kind of like the Chameleon processors. Not only are they great processors, but the C3 and the C4 are made in such a way where they can fill a lot of utility needs around your facilities when it comes to having some kind of an audio processor for various uses that are parallel to on air. And here we have both of the processors. Here you can see that they look the same, other than some silkscreen changes and the code inside the boxes. So, you know, the same half rack form factor. And we have rack mount kits to put two of them side by side, or one in a rack mount already at Angry Audio. So you can contact your dealer on that when the time comes. So there you go, the quick overview on the Audio Chameleon C3 and C4. So I will stop this now, and we will open the floor for your questions. I can find my mouse arrow.
There are a few questions and comments in the chat, and so I'll just share a few of them here. Bill just asked, could you have a dip switch so that you could change between C3 and C4, kind of drop it from a C4 to a C3? And you can. There is an upgrade downgrade path, so that you can change a C3 to a C4 and back and forth. But no, once once it's a C4, it needs to stay a C4. There's no switch to make it a C3.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at Bluetooth headphones. Okay, so we do not. This box doesn't have Bluetooth headphones in there, but you can use it with that. But just keep in mind some of the Bluetooth devices may have a bit of latency that might cause you issues. So you have to kind of look at that pretty closely.
And another fun comment from David, and of course this is from David, that we're going to have a lot of fun with FedEx and UPS telling them that we're shipping C4. So thank you, David.
That's all part of the fun.
Actually, we've been told after we, got all the metal silk screened and everything else, someone came forward and told us about the Clear Channel C4, the Clear Channel composite clipper. And, it's like, so, hopefully this isn't confused with that, but yeah, there is a product out there. Got a couple of other questions here. Price, that's a good question. The C4 will be $989 and the C3 $689. So there's about a $300 difference between the headphone processor and the live stream processor.
I also see there's some. Oh, if you had more price, I'm not going to jump in. But
no, I was just going to lead to the frequency bands and basically say it's not exactly proprietary, but it's not fixed either. These are, remember I said earlier that that things move around according to what they need to do. So parameters are adjustable and they're dynamically adjustable. So like I said, this is pretty different from what we're used to. We're used to a set of parameters that we impose on the audio. And in this case, the audio is actually informing the decisions the processor's making about parameters.
Another thing with this too, which is that this is designed from the ground up for the application of streaming and all that. It's not an FM processor that was turned into a streaming processor or rolled into that. So as a result, a lot of the things that you normally would think of with processing when it comes to frequency bands and all that are entirely different here. This is operating totally in a flat domain, and its target is digital applications and monitoring. So the bands are set up in such a way where it's being creative in that application. So they're a little different from what you would use in an FM processor, because the band selections in FM are made mostly around the limitations of pre-emphasis, and so you're choosing bands that will help you manage that and be as loud as possible, and that's a totally different story when it comes to this. It's a little more along the lines of what you would do to produce music on digital music in a way than it is broadcast. So it's kind of helps a lot with that, and it gives us a lot of freedom as to what we can do by not being constrained by things that were developed for FM.
Okay. David just asked this question: can the dip switch limit be changed to -17 to be compliant with AES TD 1008? Is that the David? Is that the proposed loudness standard for streaming coming out of AES?
Those are the recommendations. It's hopefully going to be elevated to standard. Yes.
Okay. We did talk about this, and part of the problem is there's a little bit of not yet everyone's agreed, not yet everyone's on the same page yet. But I think it's fair to say that once there is a standard, yes, it's going to meet that standard, but it may not be right now.
Yeah, once all the services fall in line, and the reason I did not go with -17, I kind of touched on a little bit, is that if you set it to -17, there's no way to hit the -14s that the Spotify's, YouTube, and all that are built around. So I decided to go -14, and you can hit -17 by backing down on the level, and you can watch it on an external 1770 meter to know when you're hitting at the right spot for -17. Or -16 or -15. There's literally -17 is what's I'm on the AES panel with David too, so we're all working on making that a standard, and that's something we would like to do. And the reason for that is -17 allows you the freedom of not having to use a lot of back-end processing at all, so you can maintain quality and loudness at the same time at -17. At -17, you're barely doing anything with a back-end limiter. As you go up on that up to -14, you're hitting a back end limiter more and harder, so it can become audible. So right now, minus 14 is about the limit that you can go before it really gets to be a bit objectionable. And a lot of streaming services, like right now, if you're a content creator using this, say, for streaming on internet radio service, a lot of them are going to be at minus 14 if they have any standard at all. My demo stream is on Live 365, and most people are at minus 10, minus 6 left. So I'm running my demo streams at minus 10 just to not sound like I'm falling off the map. But yeah, it's still a bit of a Wild West. And yes,
we have a request here from David again. David, you're out of questions. This is it. Can Corny describe how the normalization? I'm joking, by the way. Describe how the normalization procedure will work while preserving dynamic range. That's a good question.
Well, in the fact, when you're using the Chameleon, it's a multiband processor, so it's modifying the dynamic range anyway. So, and when you're in open, it's going to sound more open, but it's not going to be wide dynamic range in this case. So the normalization function on the Chameleon is one that's set up to work specifically with the audio processor, so that when you have content that builds up in loudness, which you're going to get when you split into multiple bands and you put it back together, if all the bands are kind of optimizing the RMS levels to be higher, the sum total of that output is going to be pretty loud. So when you get those type of situations happening, if it exceeds the loudness reference of the box, at, in this case minus 14, it'll start to back off on that to maintain a minus 14. But it does it in a way, it's not aggressive, it's not going to pump, it's not going to, destroy things. It's pretty gentle, and it's long term because we're going for the integrated loudness time of about 30 to 60 seconds or so. So it's a long term correction. So it's not going to sound like it's doing much of anything at all when it kicks in. I don't know if that's what you're asking specifically, David, or if we're going for something a little more that we were working on in the group.
Thanks, Corny. I'm sure you and I'll talk more about it.
Yes. The other, I saw a question about
screen, Corny. Look at the screen.
Oh.
Look what Barry did.
Yes, that's okay. So that is the analog, the last big update to the analog box. Well, maybe not the last one. I think there was another one that I did after that. And on the top screen there, that is the VCA board and mixing section of the processor there. And the chips that are totally in view in the middle are the ones that are used as mixers for the 4 bands. And on the bottom is what the front panel looked like at that time. And there was another update that I did, and I got a little fancier with the labeling on that now. But internally, I refer to that processor as Grandpappy, which is the reference that any Chameleon design or anything that I tried to do to work with a Chameleon had to stand up to. So. So thanks for that trip down memory lane there, Barry. Somebody asked a question about AES with the headphone amp and or analog. And I want to point out real quick, if you are to get the lowest latency possible through the box, you want to watch how many times you're going conversions between analog to digital and digital to analog on the way to the headphones. It's sometimes, depending on what the manufacturers are using for D to A to A to D converters, it could add a ton of latency in, and you're wondering why you've got an echo all of a sudden. So it's probably best that if you're in an AES plant or a digital plant, to stay in that digital form for as long as possible. And if you have to convert to analog, do it at the very last second. Better yet, stay in digital until the output of the processor, which is where the last D to A will happen to drive your headphones, and you'll have the best performance there. So if you have a digital console and all that, just keep everything in digital domain until you really have to dump it out into the headphone box for the lowest latency possible. Any other way, you start picking up latencies here and there. So thought I'd point that out.
Catfish, in your intro, you could have stopped at the biggest problem in the studio is the talent.
Yeah, we can't go there. You did though, but we can't go there. Yeah.
Well, having been one, at WOR, we processed headphone audio for decades, analog. John Gambling would complain that he didn't sound like he was on the radio.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, if you know the processing in a typical talk station, it's almost like, you know, a meter's going to look like DC.
Yes.
So I'm not sure exactly what equipment was used. And it went back to, 3 chiefs before Tom Ray. But apparently it solved his problem. So it looks to me like the C3 would be perfect. I don't know if they're doing it anymore because John is gone, but it was done for a long time.
The C3 is going to resemble FM processing when you listen to it through it. So it'll have a lot of that characteristic sound that you're used to hearing from talking through an FM radio station, listening off the air.
A pretty detailed technical question from Eric. How does one achieve the -16 to -20 lux range that's spec in AES TD 1004? Are you saying this processes to -14 lux and then one has to cut it externally by 2 to 4 dB to get to the -16 to -20 range? Doesn't that sacrifice dynamic range?
It does it. Well, what it does is that you won't be backing out of the ultimate amount of back-end processing when you do that. But the way the Chameleon is, it's pretty open sounding at -14 anyway, compared to a lot of other devices that are employed for that kind of stuff. So right now, you know, at this point in time, that's what this will do. And depending on how things shake out with the standards and all that, I'm sure we'll have other answers when we have a direction to go to on that, or other I should say, not other answers, but other solutions for you that are more open, and that also can include, you know, whatever updates we might have down the road.
Any other questions for our 2 experts here?
One expert and a sidekick.
I'm reading through to see if there's anything I missed.
Which one is Batman and which one is Robin, right? Does this hark back at all, Corny, to the short-lived Dominator that Aphex had some time ago?
Not really. The Dominator was a neat idea. I never really cared for the way it sounded for the most part. So, but yeah, it doesn't really have any resemblance to that at all. The Chameleon is kind of, the concept is one that's pretty unique in that when I first started thinking up these things, it was before I was working in radio. So I would just hear what radio stations sounded like on the air and try to emulate it in my own little world, not having a clue what they were doing other than it was some form of compression. So it kind of came up with my own unique sidechain, basic sidechain designs to handle that. So a lot of what I do today kind of have their roots that go back to that fundamentally deep down inside, and there's all this extra tech that's on top of it all. So it doesn't really resemble much of what's out there now. And it took me a while to really appreciate what I came up with, not knowing how everything else worked, because everyone else did it so differently. So there was a time period where I was thinking my thoughts were all wrong because it's not the way everybody else is doing it. And then as you get older, you go, well, actually, you've got a unique solution. You need to develop these and bring it out to the world. So that became the
kind of hard to describe what it sounds like. There's a couple streams that you can try out on our website, and you can hear it. You know, the beta software is actually being used right now on 2 different kinds of formats. So you'll get a feel for it. What's interesting to me, at least, as a non-expert listener, is that even though in some cases it's really dense, it doesn't sound that way. And so, you know, I used to ask Corny in the early days, you know, he'd put up, you know, one of these versions on a stream, and I'd say, so how much gain reduction is that? And he'd say, well, I don't know, 25 dB. No way. It doesn't sound like 25 dB of gain reduction. And so there's something very, you know, we've talked about the technical aspects of Chameleon, but I don't think that we've really talked about the auditory aspects. It does tend to hide the effect of the processing. So I think Chameleon, that I wish I'd even come up with a name. It's brilliant, Corny, because it just kind of perfectly describes what the product is doing. It's there and it's working hard, and you get this really nice, dense, loud, you know, bold streams, but it preserves dynamic range, or at least I perceive that the dynamic range is still there.
Yeah, there's an illusion of dynamic range that's there that you don't get with other boxes. On a point on that is that when you think about a single stage of audio processing, to say that there's 25 or more dB of gain reduction going on, it's kind of weird to think about in the sense of a traditional audio processing chain where you've got different stages going. But since the Chameleon does all these functions that would normally happen in a chain on one pass and one, you know, stage per band, and when you think about what happens, say, with your Omnia processing with, you know, like an Omnia 11 with the multiple stages, you may have the wideband sitting at maybe 12 dB of gain reduction, and the multibands might be at 10, and the limiters might be doing 5. You add all that up, and you're at that same point where the Chameleon is running on its own internally. So while that might sound like a whole lot on the surface, it's really not when you compare it to a whole chain of boxes, you know, in the aggregate amount of gain reduction you'll get across multiple stages. But because it's doing it all in a coordinated manner, it's not fighting with itself. You know, you're always, anytime you have a chain of boxes, the biggest thing you're wrestling with is trying to keep one stage from fighting with another. And it always happens no matter how smooth you make it. So, you know, stealing a couple of ideas here and there from the Chameleon and employing it in like the 11, like it did, help to alleviate some of that. But there's nothing like having, you know, the unit do everything all at one pass with the smarts of everybody talking to each other right there to make sure that when it does it, it's other things get out of the way automatically.
Corny, I'm going to ask this, but I think I'm going to question it and say, well, maybe you didn't listen with this program material, but I imagine you probably did. How does it sound with classical music?
Classical is always my test. That's
and it's the toughest thing out there to do well.
And I'm a fan of classical, so you know I will run classical music through things just to make sure it works right. And I think you've got the experience with the 11 on there, and a lot of classical people were amazed at how well it did, and that's because my pet love is classical stuff. And as a kid, I would listen. You know, when my brother and I were growing up, we were big fans of movies and stuff, and we would get sucked into the movie soundtracks and the bigger than life orchestrations and stuff. So that kind of got us hooked on to listening to classical stations, just because, you know, you can, if you're trying to think up a story when we do radio plays and stuff, which we used to do all the time, we would, you know, put that on and some piece would come on and inspire us to write the music and write our stories a certain way, with that music being like the driving force behind what's in our mind. Sometimes I would just roll tape on the classical station and record like hours or something, and then rewind and play back the right kind of music for the mood that we were trying to convey in the story we're writing. So I've always been a big fan of that. But by doing that, though, I've noticed when weird things happened with the processing on classical stations, and the one that drove me the nuts the most was when you get the brass section really opening up and the horns really go and they go, and a lot of processor would just cause it to go. I don't know how to even describe it. It just kind of goes inside out.
It just that's really funky.
Yeah. So you know, when I started testing out these processors with classical, you know, that's one of many things that I kind of make sure that doesn't happen when you're, you know, using these boxes on that. On the classical, I would say you probably want to use like the 9 o'clock position, or 12 o'clock worst case. It'll add some warmth to your classical music automatically, because the way the C4 is set right now, it's kind of targeted at the bulk of the programming out there. So most of it's going to be contemporary stuff. So I try to make it so it doesn't get too out of hand with classical. So if you have thin sounding classical pieces, it'll kind of warm it up a little bit. And I'm noticing more classical stations are wanting to sound warmer anyway, because they have to compete with all the rock and roll stations and stations with bass. So I don't think it'll be a horrible thing, but I'm kind of curious at what people think as we start getting them in the hands of some of those folks.
Well, the idea of doing it, using it for your, a lot of NPR stations are doing classical on their HD2, HD3.
Yes.
And looks like might be a perfect solution, because most people, if they're honest, they really don't know how to set a typical processor.
Yeah.
For classical music.
Yes. It's its own unique beast.
And it is, and it's an art to get it right.
Corny hates it when I say this, but because he's the one that programmed the AI, it's like having a tiny little Cornelius in every single box that we sell. So
Well, I can think of worse things.
A little itty bitty Corny, in there. We should make like little toy Cornies that we could include in the box. No, bad idea. No?
I don't know. I'll leave that in your department.
Okay, all right.
Just put his picture on the front panel.
Will it be a bobblehead?
Maybe. Real quick on the when I was talking about when I would watch the data going on between the bands and you would see them colluding with each other, that happens a lot with the classical music, because you end up with stuff where the music is playing and then there's no high end, because it's all just kind of lower instruments. Like I don't know all the instruments in the orchestra, I love listening to it, but some of the bassier horns and all that, and you've got nothing really for high end. There's really not a lot of high end in classical anyway. If you really, unless you hear it on the box that's being pushed multiband, it'll give you highs where they're not supposed to be. But anyway, getting back to the point, when the bands, the lower bands would tend to collude with each other to coordinate across instruments, and the high band would be the one that gets shut off a lot, and so that keeps it from building up all the highs or making the violin sound really plasticky or whatever, So which I was like happy to see, so.
Well, that reminds me back when our program director, way back when, first heard Dolby A. He swore up, down, and backwards that it was killing the high end because there was no tape hiss.
Yes. Yeah, a lot of people will equate high end to tape hiss, on a lot of things, yeah. Or a tape hiss to high end on a lot of things, I should say.
We proved it wrong.
So somebody asked, what is 1770 meter? BS1770, ITU BS1770 is a loudness measurement standard that was established a while back, and it's a way of giving some taking loudness measurements out of the subjective range and into something a little more objective, and it works pretty well. So those meters, when you use it, you can use it from all kinds of things, and I think there are programs such as Ulean, Orban has a meter. There's a few others that are out there. They can come in really handy if you haven't used one before. And I think a lot of people should use them, especially when it comes to matching between HD analog, HD1 and the analog signals and stuff, where there's always a transition. And it's really hard, depending on where you are, to try to subjectively tell whether or not you've got them balanced or not. I mean, there's the Golden Eagle box that'll tell you stuff. But one way to do that is just take one of those BS1770 meters and measure what your analog is, loudness wise, and then put the HD1 on there. And then you can adjust your levels to match them a little bit better. They're very handy. You can use them for all kinds of things. So I encourage you to look for the ITU BS1770 loudness meters software pieces that are out there and start playing with it. That opens up a whole new world for you. Can the audio Chameleon be used for FM air? No, it's not an FM box. It doesn't have any way of handling FM. I'm not even sure if you were to bolt it up to a clipper if it would sound right, because it's not, the preemphasis curve is not even taken into effect. Maybe some FFT clipper can take it and handle it and do wonderful things with it. I don't know, but that wasn't really my goal or our goal at all with this. We were shooting for something that was purely for the digital domain world.
You know, Frank, the Godfather, I really didn't want him, you know, like doing what it is he does to me. So we're not competing with him.
You mean you don't want him to run over you with his train?
Yeah, that's it.
You don't want those.
No, we're focusing on streaming audio and studio audio, and we think there's a nice business there, and you know, and quite honestly, we think that we can do it a little bit better than what some other people are doing. So that's our focus.
Well, I want to thank both you and Corny for spending the time with us and explaining the product. I'm sure that it's going to be available when?
Should be shipping in the next 3 or 4 weeks, and don't ask me about electronic components right now. We don't talk about getting electronic components these days, because my head will explode. But we're there. Within the next 3 to 4 weeks, we'll be starting to ship these. Just one more comment. Will there be a plug-in or a software package? Yes, there will. But we can't give you a date on that just now. But it is on the roadmap.
So by the end of next month, everybody will be able to listen to it if they'd like, and employ it and have fun.
And you can check it out now if you go to the Angry Audio site. We have links up to a couple of demo streams that I have with it running. The one stream, the rock stream is set to open, so it's the most dynamic. The pop stream is set to aggressive, just so you know. Yeah, there you go. So City Internet Radio is open. Hit City Radio is pretty aggressive. So those are the two extremes of the settings there.
All right. Well, we hope you will return to us again and again when more of your new products come out and solve problems.
Thanks again for inviting us. We really appreciate it.
Okay. Well, you're not being chased away by any sort of.
Okay, well, we'll hang out, but I just wanted to let you know we appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. All right, I'm going to toss you a question, Corny, since you're still sitting here with your mic open.
Okay.
G-Force.
Mm-hmm.
Gould Force. What's G-Force actually?
G-Force is okay. So the Omnia 11, the original version, the orange screen version, as I call it, was really my first DSP audio processing design of any type, which is pretty cool that it came out as well as it did. It put a lot of work into that. So so it had some of my ideas in there, and they kind of worked. After a few years, I got a little better with the smarts, as it were, designed as of then, that I was shooting for in the 11. So G-Force was an update, a pretty major update to the dynamic section of the Omnia. And it also was kind of in response to some of the clipper changes that Frank was doing and some of the other things that were going on in the world, such as insertion points and stuff like that, which are kind of problematic in the orange version to implement because they were just not even on the radar when we designed it. So that stuff kind of got shoehorned in there, but it wasn't, it really needed to be optimized for that set of uses that people were doing at that time. So the G-Force makes it easier. By the way it works, makes it easier to do things like inserting, your watermark encoders in the middle of the processing chain or the back end of the processing chain, so that you're feeding the encoder processed audio versus raw program, which can be problematic, especially if you have content where it falls really quiet for long periods of time, or maybe your board op didn't write levels right. So we saw a lot of broadcasters tacking on boxes in front of the main processor to try to deal with that for the ratings encoder and compromising the overall sound of the station in the process. So I thought was, well, if you can put the encoder after all the processing that you're already using, then it should be even better because it's dealing with audio the way the listeners hear it, which is very different from programming. And could optimize things further for your encoders. And lo and behold, it works. And I'm not talking about Voltaire in this case. So Voltaire is a whole nother thing that wraps around your encoder. But if you don't have that and you just did that moving of the encoder, it would help quite a bit. And if you use Voltaire right, it helps even more. But a lot of people don't really use it right, which is kind of annoying.